The doctor didn't look at the screen. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The ultrasound monitor was glowing beside me, my baby's heartbeat flickering steadily in grainy black and white. Normally, doctors smiled at that moment. They pointed things out, they reassured you. But this time, the woman standing at the foot of the bed wasn't watching the screen at all. She was staring at my file. Her fingers tightened around the folder. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands before she noticed I was watching. Then, without warning, she reached over and turned the monitor off, just like that. The room went quiet in a way that felt violent, as if someone had cut power to my entire life. "Mrs. Mercer," she said softly, too softly, "I need to speak with you privately, right now." My chest seized. Every fear a pregnant woman carries rushed forward at once. Defects, heart problems, things you can't fix. I nodded numbly as she helped me sit up, handed me a tissue I didn't remember asking for, and led me down the hall to her office. She closed the door. Then she locked it. That's when I knew this wasn't about the baby. She sat across from me, folded her hands, and took a slow breath like someone about to step off a cliff. "You need to leave your husband today, before you go home, and you need to speak to a divorce lawyer first." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, the sound sharp and wrong in the small office. "What?" I said. "Why would I do that? I'm pregnant. We're married. We're happy." She didn't smile. Her face was pale, drawn tight with something that looked like fear. "That," she said quietly, "is exactly the problem." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "What I'm about to show you," she continued, "is going to destroy everything you think you know about your marriage." 4 months earlier, my life had still felt solid. My name is Daphne Wilson Mercer. I'm 32 years old. I work as a marketing director at a boutique firm in Connecticut, and I come from what people politely refer to as old money. 5 years ago, my grandmother passed away and left me two things: a trust worth just over $2 million and the Wilson family home, a historic estate where 5 generations of women had lived, married, raised children, and grown old together. I never flaunted it. I worked, I drove an aging car, I bought my coffee at the same place every morning. The money was security, not identity. What I didn't understand at the time was that security attracts predators. I met Grant Mercer 4 years ago at my family's annual charity gala. The Wilson Foundation had hosted it for decades. That night, I was cornered at the bar by a man who asked about my finances before he asked my name. Then Grant appeared. Tall, dark hair, easy smile. He joked about the awful jazz band, asked what I was drinking, talked about books, not balance sheets. He claimed to be a financial advisor who'd attended on a last-minute invite, and said almost proudly that he had no idea who the Wilson family was. At the time, it felt refreshing. In hindsight, it should have terrified me. We dated for a year. Grant was attentive, thoughtful, endlessly considerate. He remembered tiny details. He insisted on paying for everything. He seemed genuine. My mother wasn't fooled for a second. After meeting him once, she pulled me aside and said, "His smile doesn't reach his eyes. Something about him is wrong." I accused her of being paranoid, overprotective, jealous. We fought, and then we stopped talking. 2 years of near silence with the woman who raised me because I chose to believe a man I'd known for 12 months over my own mother. Grant and I married on my grandmother's estate, a perfect ceremony. He cried through his vows, tears sliding down his face as he promised to love and protect me forever. Looking back, those were probably the most honest tears he ever shed, not from joy, from relief. After 2 years of trying for a baby without success, we saw a fertility specialist. The diagnosis came down hard: severe male factor infertility. Grant's sperm count was nearly non-existent. He cried in the car afterward, apologized over and over like he'd failed me. I held him, told him we'd figure it out together. What I didn't realize was that he wasn't grieving, he was recalculating. We decided on IVF with a specialized procedure. Grant took over everything, researching clinics, handling paperwork, choosing doctors. I thought he was being supportive. I was exhausted and emotionally drained. The first cycle failed. The second worked. 2 pink lines. Grant hugged me and talked about nursery colors and baby names. That same night, he casually suggested I update my will. I thought it was practical. I had no idea he was already counting my grandmother's money as his. By the time I was 4 months pregnant, something in my marriage had shifted. Small things at first. Grant started keeping his phone face down. New passwords, late-night calls he took outside. He said it was work. Financial advising emergencies at 11 at night on weekends. I found receipts, expensive dinners for two at places I'd never been, a hotel room 40 minutes from our house. When I asked, he smiled and said I was being hormonal. "You're paranoid," he told me. "Don't turn into one of those wives." I apologized for questioning him. That's how good he was. Then came the money requests. "Add me to your trust. Power of attorney is normal. We should sell your grandmother's house and invest it properly." When I finally said no, his warmth vanished. He slept on the edge of the bed, gave me the silent treatment, blamed my pregnancy for his distance. One night, I woke up at 2 in the morning and found him whispering into his phone. "It's almost time," he said. "By spring, everything will be settled." When he saw me, he hung up immediately. A week later, my best friend asked me one question I couldn't answer. "When was the last time your husband looked happy to see you? Really happy?" I didn't sleep that night. And then came the ultrasound, the locked door, the folder on the doctor's desk. She looked at me and said, "My sister works at your fertility clinic. 3 weeks ago, she came to me in tears." That was when my entire life began to burn. Dr. Brennan didn't slide the folder toward me like it was just paperwork. She placed it down slowly, like it could explode. Her hands were still trembling. She tried to hide it by flattening her palms on the desk, but the fear in her eyes gave her away. "My sister's name is Molly," she said. "She's a nurse at the fertility clinic you used, the clinic your husband insisted on." Something in my chest went cold at the words "your husband insisted on," because yes, Grant had been unusually specific about that clinic. He'd researched it like he was selecting a private school, a surgeon, a future. He'd handled every form, every call, every appointment. At the time, I'd felt grateful. In that office, I began to understand I had been guided, like livestock. Dr. Brennan opened the folder and turned it so I could see. At first, it looked like what I expected. Clinic records, codes, signatures, lab sheets, the kind of paper that means nothing until it means everything. Then I saw the words that made my mouth go dry. Donor ID, sample substitution log, payment confirmation. I blinked hard, thinking my brain was misfiring. "This can't be," I whispered. Dr. Brennan's voice was very steady now, the way it gets when someone has already cried all their tears and is operating on pure will. "Molly came to me 3 weeks ago," she said. "She showed up at my apartment close to midnight. She was sobbing so hard she could barely speak." I stared at the pages, but I was barely reading. My eyes were moving without understanding. "Molly hasn't been sleeping," she continued. "She's lost weight. She's been having panic attacks at work. The guilt has been eating her alive." Guilt? My stomach turned. "What did she do?" I asked, though I already felt the answer forming like poison. Dr. Brennan swallowed. 7 months ago," she said, "a patient's husband approached her at the clinic. He was charming, well-dressed, calm. He told her he had a situation that required discretion." My fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. "He said his wife didn't know," she went on, "but that he was using donor sperm for their IVF cycle. He claimed there was a genetic issue in his family he didn't want to burden her with. He told Molly it was nothing sinister. He just needed help keeping it quiet." I felt my pulse in my throat. Then Dr. Brennan said the number. $30,000. I jerked my head up. "What?" "30,000, she repeated, "for a nurse making barely over 50,000 a year. Student loans, credit card debt, the kind of financial pressure that makes people do things they swore they'd never do." My mouth opened and nothing came out. Dr. Brennan pointed to a specific page. "Molly helped switch the samples," she said. And in that single sentence, the room tilted. My hands went numb. Grant's sperm sample, she paused, like she hated the words "your husband" too much to say them again, was replaced. Molly swapped it with donor sperm. My ears rang. I stared at the record, my eyes catching on a donor code, a signature, a timestamp. "Your pregnancy," she said quietly, "was achieved with donor sperm." My throat locked. I wanted to say something like, "That's impossible," but it wasn't. Not after the diagnosis, not after 2 years of failure, not after Grant's devastation in that car. I remembered his crying, and suddenly, for the first time, I understood what those tears had really been. Not grief, calculation. Dr. Brennan kept going because she had to. "The embryologist was involved too," she said. "Molly said your husband approached him separately, another payment. Between the two of them, the switch went undetected." I felt sick, like my organs were trying to crawl away from my own skin. And then, Dr. Brennan said, "The pregnancy worked." I looked down at my belly. 4 months along, a baby I already loved, already imagined, already protected in my mind. A baby created through fraud. Not because donor conception is wrong, no, not that. Because it was done without my consent. Because it was done as a weapon. I swallowed hard. Why? My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Dr. Brennan's eyes darkened. "Because," she said, "this wasn't about giving you a child." She turned another page, and that's when the story became something else entirely, something colder, something planned. Molly didn't just save the sample records, she saved everything. There were screenshots, emails, notes, payment trails. They weren't vague enough. Grant thought he was clever, but he wasn't cautious. He was arrogant. He assumed no one would ever dare question him. Dr. Brennan tapped a paragraph. "Your husband paid around $50,000 in total," she said, "between Molly, the embryologist, and the donor." 50,000, I repeated faintly. That was more than he spent on our entire wedding, including the honeymoon. I remember thinking that, and then feeling something inside me snap. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a lock clicking into place. Dr. Brennan leaned back. "And there's more," she said. Of course there was. There's always more. She began laying out the scheme, piece by piece, like a prosecutor explaining a crime. "Phase 1, she said, was the bribe. Switch the sperm samples. Make sure the pregnancy happens with donor sperm. Phase 2, she continued, was the performance. Your husband becomes the devoted father-to-be, loving husband, perfect image." I could see Grant smiling at me. I could hear him talking about nursery colors, baby names, his hand on my belly in public. It wasn't love, it was branding. Dr. Brennan flipped another page. "Phase 3 was planned for after the birth," she said. "He intended to alter the clinic records." My blood turned to ice. "Alter them how?" "To make it look like your IVF cycle failed," she said, "so that afterwards the story becomes you conceived naturally." My stomach dropped because I knew what came next before she even said it. "Phase 4, Dr. Brennan said, voice tight, was the kill shot." The kill shot. She explained that he planned to suggest it as something sweet, a sentimental idea, proof to hang in the nursery, a celebration of fatherhood. I could hear it. I could literally hear Grant's voice saying it with that warm, reasonable tone. And then, Phase 5, Dr. Brennan said, was the kill shot. The kill shot. "She demands the test," she explained. "The test proves he isn't the biological father, which he already knows will happen. The clinic records, once altered, will show IVF failed, which means the only explanation is..." She let the silence finish the sentence. I couldn't breathe. "He accuses you of cheating," Dr. Brennan said. "He claims you betrayed him.
He becomes the victim. My hands began to shake. Not like hers. Mine were shaking with rage. Dr. Brennan looked at me, her face filled with pity. "Do you have a prenup?" she asked. "Yes," I nodded slowly. "My family required it. Old money families always do. It was standard." Dr. Brennan exhaled. "Molly told me that your prenup has an infidelity clause." My throat tightened. "Yes," I whispered quietly. Dr. Brennan nodded once. "That's what he was aiming for," she said. And then she told me the number. $500,000. My head snapped up. "What?" "500,000, she repeated. "If one spouse cheats, they owe the other a penalty, $500,000, plus forfeiture of claims to assets, plus the wronged spouse can sue for additional damages." My entire body goes rigid. So that was it. That was the point. Not love, not a baby, not a marriage, a trap. He was going to use my own pregnancy as evidence against me. He was going to stand over me while I was postpartum, bleeding and exhausted and terrified for my child, and tell me I was a cheater. He was going to demand $500,000 from my grandmother's legacy, and he thought shame would make me obedient. Dr. Brennan slid another set of papers forward. "Payment records," she said, "traceable to accounts your husband controls, email exchanges with the embryologist, the donor ID, the original sample logs." My eyes moved over the documents, and the room felt like it was shrinking. "There's also something else," she added carefully. I didn't want something else, but life doesn't ask what you want. Dr. Brennan's voice dropped. "Grant Mercer has significant gambling debt." My mouth dried again. "How much?" $180,000. I stared at her. That number didn't even feel real. "He's been gambling for years," she said. "Online poker, sports betting, casino trips, and—" She paused, eyes hardening. "The money he used for the bribes, he didn't pull from savings." My heart began pounding again. He embezzled it from his clients. Small amounts, carefully hidden, over time. I felt like I was floating above my own body, watching this happen to someone else. I drove home from the clinic with my hands steady on the steering wheel and my face carefully blank. That wasn't accidental. Grant had installed security cameras around the house 2 years earlier. At the time, he'd framed it as protection. Crime was rising, he'd said. Better safe than sorry. Now I wondered how often he watched the footage, whether he studied my expressions, whether he cataloged my movements, whether he'd already trained himself to detect suspicion in my eyes. So I gave him none. When I pulled into the driveway, my heartbeat was even. When I opened the front door, my shoulders were relaxed. When I stepped inside, I wore the same soft smile I'd practiced for years. Grant was waiting in the kitchen. He turned toward me with that smile, warm, attentive, perfectly calibrated, the one my mother had warned me about. "How was the appointment?" he asked. "Is the baby okay?" I walked across the floor, wrapped my arms around him, and hugged him. I could feel his body relax. "Perfect," I said, and meant something very different than he heard. "Everything's absolutely perfect." He kissed my forehead and exhaled, the tension draining out of him like air from a punctured balloon. He thought he was still winning. That night, I cooked dinner, I laughed at his jokes, I apologized for being paranoid lately, and blamed hormones, using the exact same excuse he'd thrown at me for months. His shoulders loosened, his guard dropped. He slept soundly beside me that night. I did not. I lay awake until nearly 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, replaying every document I'd seen, every lie I'd swallowed, every moment I'd defended him to my own mother. And then I started planning. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Then I drove 2 hours in the opposite direction of anywhere Grant might expect me to be. I checked my mirrors constantly, not because I thought I was being followed, but because I finally understood the kind of man I was dealing with. I met her in a small, unremarkable office in a strip mall. Rosalind Weaver, former police detective, 15 years on the force, private investigator for the last decade. She had sharp eyes, a posture that suggested nothing got past her, and the kind of calm that only comes from having seen humanity at its worst. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt, didn't gasp, didn't react. When I finished, she leaned back slightly and smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, like a predator who just spotted blood in the water. Your husband made a lot of mistakes. Arrogant men always do. She closed her notebook. Give me 2 weeks. She had results in 10 days. Grant Mercer wasn't just desperate, he was drowning. Rosalind confirmed the gambling debts first, $180,000. Online betting platforms, underground poker games, private lenders who didn't send polite reminder emails when payments were late. The kind of people who get creative. Then came the embezzlement, approximately $53,000 missing from client accounts at his firm, siphoned slowly over 18 months, small transactions designed for avoiding detection. His firm had no idea yet. That would change. And then there was the affair. 8 months long, hotel rooms, romantic dinners, weekend getaways masked as conferences, with his assistant. Of course it was his assistant. There's something almost insulting about how unoriginal that is. If you're going to destroy your marriage, at least show a little imagination. Rosalind had photos, receipts, messages, the kind of evidence that doesn't care how charming you are. But the worst part came last. This isn't his first attempt, she said, sliding another folder across the desk. 5 years ago, in Boston, Grant had dated a woman named Caroline Ashford. Family money, trust fund, the same pattern. He'd convinced her to open a joint account. Financial irregularities followed. She ended things immediately, but never pressed charges. Too embarrassed. Rosalind tracked her down. Caroline was more than willing to speak now. I always regretted letting him walk away, she'd told Rosalind. I'm done protecting him. So was I. I met Molly Brennan a few days later. We chose a coffee shop an hour away from town, far enough that no one would recognize either of us. She looked worse than I expected. Thin, pale, dark circles carved under her eyes like permanent shadows. The guilt had been eating her alive. She started crying the moment she sat down. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. I knew it was wrong. I needed the money and he was so convincing and... I stopped her gently. I need to know one thing, I said. Are you willing to testify, officially? She nodded without hesitation. Yes, she said. Under oath, I'll tell them everything. I should have gone to the police immediately. I believed her. She wasn't the architect. She was a tool. The embryologist, once he learned Molly had saved records and was cooperating, developed a sudden moral awakening. He gave a full statement in exchange for reduced charges. Fear is an excellent conscience. The hardest call I made was to my mother. 2 years of silence, 2 years of choosing Grant over her. The phone rang twice before she answered. Daphne. Her voice was cautious, hopeful. Mom, I said, and my voice broke immediately. You were right, about everything, and I'm so sorry. There was a pause. I braced for the I told you so. Instead, she said, What do you need, sweetheart? That broke me harder than any accusation ever could. My mother is a retired attorney, estate law, 30 years of experience. Within 48 hours, she'd connected me with the best divorce lawyer in Connecticut and a criminal prosecutor who specialized in fraud. She didn't need to be right. She just needed me to be safe. My divorce lawyer was named Sandra Kowalski. 5'2", silver hair, reading glasses perched permanently on her nose. She looked like someone's gentle grandmother. She was a shark in a cardigan. She reviewed everything: clinic records, witness statements, financial trails, affair evidence. When she finished, she looked at me and smiled. Your husband is facing fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement charges, and his planned falsification of medical records would have been a felony. She coordinated with the prosecutor. Molly gave a sworn statement. Grant's firm was quietly alerted. Accounts were frozen. A judge reviewed the evidence. An arrest warrant was issued. Sandra called it a formality. I called it justice. 6 weeks after the ultrasound, I suggested a celebration, a baby moon party, at my grandmother's estate. Both families, close friends, a garden gathering to celebrate the baby. Grant's eyes lit up. More witnesses, more sympathy, more people to pity him later. "That's a wonderful idea," he said, kissing my forehead. "Let me help plan it." "Oh no," I smiled sweetly. "You've been working so hard. I'll handle everything." He had no idea what everything included. Police officers waiting in the guest house, my lawyer near the bar, every witness present, every document organized, and my husband about to walk into his most public mistake of his life. That morning, I watched him in the mirror practicing smiles, adjusting his tie, rehearsing the role of devoted father. He thought he was walking into his triumph. He had no idea he was walking into his own funeral.
The Wilson estate had never looked more alive. Late spring had turned my grandmother's gardens into something almost unreal. Roses heavy with bloom, hydrangeas spilling color over stone paths, lavender lining the edges like a quiet promise. White tents dotted the lawn, champagne chilled in silver buckets. A string quartet played softly near the rose bushes. 50 guests arrived dressed in their Sunday best, family, friends, colleagues. Grant's parents drove up from Maryland that morning. His mother dabbed at her eyes constantly, telling anyone who would listen how proud she was of her son, how excited she was to become a grandmother. His father shook hands, just puffed out, basking in the reflected glow of a successful son and a beautiful pregnant wife. My mother stood near the dessert table, calm and observant, watching Grant the way a cat watches a mouse that doesn't yet realize the room has no exits. Grant was in his element. He worked the crowd like a politician, laughing, touching shoulders, playing the role he'd rehearsed for months. Every time someone lifted a phone for a photo, his hand found my belly. His smile widened, his eyes softened. He was so good at pretending to be human. For a moment, just a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the $50,000 he'd spent trying to destroy me. The sympathy evaporated. Around 3 o'clock, Grant did exactly what I knew he would. He pulled me close, arm around my waist, voice loud enough for half the garden to hear. "You know what we should do, honey?" he said, smiling. "A DNA test. We can frame the results in the nursery, proof that daddy and baby are connected forever." There were murmurs of approval. Someone sighed about how romantic it was. His mother dabbed her eyes again. I hesitated, just enough. "Oh, I don't know," I said softly. "That seems like a lot of trouble." Grant squeezed my waist gently. "Come on, it'll be special. We could even open the results right here, make it part of the celebration." He looked around at the guests. "What do you think, everyone?" Encouraging nods, smiles, applause. Grant was glowing. This was it. The trap he'd spent over a year building was about to snap shut. He just didn't realize whose neck was in it. "Well," I said, meeting his eyes, "if everyone thinks it's a good idea." I turned and walked toward the small platform near the fountain, the one set up for toasts. I picked up the microphone. Grant smiled up at me, champagne glass in hand, already preparing his devastated expression, practicing the tears he'd planned to cry when I was exposed. "Thank you all for coming today," my voice carrying clearly across the lawn. "This party is supposed to be about celebration, about family, about truth." I looked straight at my husband. My husband said he wanted to reveal something special today, so I'm going to help him do exactly that. His smile flickered, just for a second. I reached under the podium and pulled out a folder. 3 months ago, I said, I learned something about my husband that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. The air shifted. I'm sharing it today because Grant is right. This should be about truth. His champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. Grant and I struggled with fertility. Natural conception was impossible, so we pursued IVF at a clinic he personally chose. I held up the first document. These are the original clinic records.
I let the word hang. Original. These records show my husband bribed 2 clinic employees to switch his sperm sample with donor sperm. He paid a nurse $30,000, he paid the embryologist, and he paid $15,000 to a donor. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I gestured toward the edge of the lawn. Derek Sykes, the donor who had no idea he was participating in fraud. Derek stepped forward, pale but steady. This donor sperm was used to conceive my child, without my knowledge, without my consent. A champagne glass shattered on the stone patio. My husband's plan was simple. After our baby was born, he planned to demand a DNA test. When it proved he wasn't the biological father, which he already knew, he would accuse me of cheating. I lifted another document. Our prenup includes an infidelity clause. If I supposedly cheated, I would owe him $500,000. Grant finally found his voice. Daphne, this is insane. You're confused. It's the pregnancy. I'm not finished. The silence was absolute. In addition, I said, my husband embezzled approximately $50,000 from his clients to fund this scheme. I looked directly at a man near the bar, Grant's boss. His face told the story before he spoke a word. My husband also has $180,000 in gambling debts, and for the past 8 months, I held up photographs. He's been having an affair with his assistant. Grant's mother made a sound like she'd been punched. This wasn't his first attempt. 5 years ago, in Boston, he targeted another wealthy woman. She's provided a statement. Grant's champagne glass slipped from his fingers and exploded against the stone. These are lies, he stammered. She's unstable. The pregnancy has affected his mind. Grant, his mother said quietly, her voice sharp as glass, is any of this true? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Molly Brennan stepped forward. I'm the nurse he bribed. I have documentation. I've given my statement to police. Derek spoke next. He paid me $15,000. I had no idea this was fraud. Grant looked around wildly at the faces that had adored him minutes earlier. Then 2 police officers stepped out from the guest house. Grant Mercer, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. The handcuffs clicked shut in front of 50 witnesses. Grant tried one last time as they led him away. Daphne, please, we can fix this. Think about our baby. I looked at him, the man who'd promised to protect me while calculating how much he could steal. You're right, Grant, I said calmly. We just worked it out. The police car drove down the gravel path, past my grandmother's gardens, through the gates he'd wanted so badly to own. Grant was denied bail. The divorce finalized quickly. The criminal case moved faster. Fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement. Every charge stuck. My baby was born 4 months later, healthy, perfect, innocent. Family asked questions. I answered what mattered. Family isn't DNA. Family is who shows up, who stays, who chooses you when it's hard. I have my mother again. I have my child. I have the house my grandmother built with love. Grant Mercer tried to take everything from me. All he really did was prove how strong I'd always been. Some people wait their whole lives for karma. I was lucky. I got to deliver mine in person.